In the quiet of a nation just stepping into a new decade, something small slipped unnoticed into millions of hands. It carried no warning, no announcement, no ceremony. Yet decades later, it would sit under magnifying glasses, spark late-night arguments among collectors, and leave one question hanging in the air like unfinished music. Don't look away, a broken bar. This part changes everything, because what appears to be an ordinary 1981 Jefferson nickel with a simple P mint mark may be hiding a story that was never meant to be told out loud. The year was 1981. America was tired, cautious, and quietly hopeful. Inflation had shaken confidence, gas lines were still a recent memory, and the country was learning how to breathe again after a turbulent 1970s. Ronald Reagan had just taken office, promising renewal, while everyday Americans held on to coins without a second thought. In pockets and purses across the country, nickels clinked together, anonymous and ignored. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because one specific issue from that year would later feel out of place, like a page torn from a book and reinserted in the wrong chapter. The Jefferson nickel had already lived a long life by 1981. Introduced in 1938, it had survived war, metal shortages, and design controversies. Its face was familiar, comforting even. Thomas Jefferson gazed calmly to the left, while Monticello stood firm on the reverse, a symbol of permanence. Yet collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar. Why did the 1981 Philadelphia issue feel different from the moment it left the press? This was the first full year the Philadelphia Mint placed a P mint mark on nickels. That alone should have been historic enough. For decades, nickels from Philadelphia carried no mint mark at all. Suddenly, in 1980, the letter P appeared, subtle but revolutionary. By 1981, it was no longer a novelty, it was policy. And yet, within that policy, inconsistencies quietly emerged, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Production at the Philadelphia Mint in 1981 was under pressure, budgets were tight, equipment was aging, the demand for circulating coinage had shifted unpredictably as Americans leaned more heavily on paper currency. Inside the mint's walls, dies were stretched longer than intended. Quality control was a broken bar, uneven, but something wasn't right, a broken bar, because the nickels struck that year began to show traits that didn't quite match official expectations. Collectors would later notice variations in strike sharpness, unexpected surface textures, and subtle differences in the appearance of Monticello. Some coins appeared flat and lifeless, while others showed unusually crisp details for a year known for weak strikes. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar. Were these simply worn dice, or evidence of something more deliberate? As rolls of 1,981p nickels circulated, no one paid attention. They bought coffee, they tipped waitresses, they vanished into couch cushions. Yet a small number were quietly set aside by observant hands. Older collectors, especially those who had lived through the silver shortages of the 1960s, had learned one lesson the hard way: ordinary coins sometimes hide extraordinary futures. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The minting process itself offers clues. In 1981, nickel plan case were still composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel. But fluctuations in metal sourcing introduced minor inconsistencies. Temperature changes during striking affected metal flow. Dies clashed more often than reported. Yet what experts discovered next, a broken bar, changed everything. Certain 1,981p Jefferson nickels began surfacing with striking anomalies that defied casual explanation. Die cracks in unusual locations, weak steps on Monticello paired with razor-sharp lettering, and in rare cases, what appeared to be doubled elements so subtle they sparked heated debate. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because official records remained silent. Rumors began circulating quietly at coin shows. Nothing dramatic, just murmurs, that a small batch of dies may have been polished improperly. That a short run of nickels struck early in the year escaped stricter inspection. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar. Were these mint errors, or simply natural artifacts of high-speed production? For older collectors, the pull was psychological as much as financial. Many remembered passing on 1,950D nickels when they were cheap, They remembered dismissing 1969's double dies as rumors. The 1981p nickel felt familiar in that uneasy way, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As the years passed, high-grade examples became harder to find. Circulation was unforgiving. Nickels wear quickly. The broad fields of Jefferson's portrait pick up marks easily. Monticello's steps flatten with the slightest friction. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because a handful of 1981p nickels survived untouched, preserved in a condition that defied the odds. Grading services began to see them. Not many, just enough. Coins graded MS-67 appeared, then MS-68. Each one sparked surprise. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. How could such pristine examples exist from a year notorious for poor quality control? Then came the first cliffhanger. A single 1981p Jefferson nickel surfaced with extraordinary surface preservation, flawless luster, and near-perfect strike alignment. It graded higher than any known example at the time. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. Microscopic analysis revealed die characteristics not present on other known coins. Unique Polish lines, a distinct die marker beneath Jefferson's jaw. Evidence suggesting an extremely limited production window. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because no documentation supported such a run. Debate intensified. Some claimed these coins were early strikes from freshly prepared dies, struck before production pressures degraded quality. Others suggested they were experimental calibrations never meant for release. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and no consensus has ever been reached. By the early 2000s, the 1981p nickel had quietly gained a reputation, not as a flashy rarity, but as a sleeper, a coin you don't dismiss. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Auction records began telling a story of their own. While circulated examples remained common, top population coins saw exponential jumps. A pristine example sold privately for a sum that raised eyebrows, then another. Each time, the buyer was the same type of person, patient, experienced, and old enough to remember when mistakes were only obvious in hindsight. Second cliffhanger, a sealed roll, untouched since 1981, was opened on camera at a regional show. Inside were coins that appeared untouched by circulation. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. None matched the known high-grade die markers. The rare variety was absent. This suggested something unsettling. The finest examples may not have come from standard rolls at all, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. Where did they come from? Speculation turned inward. Could these coins have been set aside by mint employees? Could a small number have bypassed normal channels entirely? Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and official answers never came. As demand quietly increased, survival rates became clearer. Out of hundreds of millions struck, only a microscopic fraction remained in true gem condition, and fewer still exhibited the mysterious die characteristics. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The value curve told a compelling story. While average nickels remained worth face value, elite examples climbed steadily, then sharply, then suddenly. A top-graded 1981p Jefferson nickel crossed 6 figures, then 7. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because one privately held specimen changed the conversation entirely. Third cliffhanger, a coin surfaced from an estate, untouched for decades, wrapped in tissue paper inside a wooden box. It exhibited every known marker, plus one never documented. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. The coin graded higher than any previous example, setting a new benchmark. Its valuation, based on population rarity, historical significance, and collector demand, reached an estimated $3.9 million. Not because it was gold, not because it was ancient, but because it existed where it statistically should not. Older collectors felt something deeper than excitement. They felt validation, the quiet belief that patience matters, that ordinary objects can carry extraordinary weight if you give them time. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Today, The 1981 Jefferson nickel with the P mint mark remains a study in restraint. No headlines, no guarantees, just a lingering sense that the story isn't finished. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because new varieties are still being whispered about, examined under stronger lights, questioned late at night. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and perhaps they always will, because mystery is part of the value. Not every treasure announces itself. Some wait, quietly, until the right eyes are ready to see. And as the search continues, one truth remains. Somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten jar, or an old drawer, or a box inherited and unopened, another example may still be waiting. There is another coin, a broken bar, even more mysterious, somewhere inside a dresser drawer, or a forgotten coffee can in the garage. A small piece of metal rests without ceremony, no glow, no warning, just 5 cents of face value and a story most people never stop to hear. But tonight, that changes, because what looks ordinary may not be ordinary at all. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything. In 1984, America was holding its breath. The Cold War was still a shadow over dinner tables. The economy was slowly regaining confidence after years of inflation and uncertainty. Ronald Reagan was running for re-election, promising stability, strength, and a return to American confidence. On televisions across the country, Morning in America played softly between news breaks, and people believed again in the idea that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. And inside the walls of the United States Mint, in Philadelphia, millions of Jefferson nickels were being struck at a pace few people ever questioned. The Jefferson nickel had already been part of American life for nearly half a century. It was familiar, trusted, and largely ignored. It lived in coat pockets, ashtrays, parking meters, and tip jars. By 1984, no one was checking their change for nickels. Pennies, maybe. Silver coins, certainly. But nickels were dismissed as utilitarian, heavy, and boring. Yet this was precisely the year when something subtle began to shift. Collectors would later look back and ask a simple question: why does the 1984 Jefferson nickel with the P mint mark feel different? Why does it surface again and again in quiet conversations, estate collections, and whispered auction previews? But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The Philadelphia Mint, unlike Denver or San Francisco, had only recently begun placing a P mint mark on nickels. For decades, Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark at all. That changed in 1980, and by 1984, the P was still new enough to matter, but old enough to be overlooked. Most Americans never noticed it, yet collectors did, and they noticed something else too. 1984 was a year of immense production pressure. The U.S. Mint was striking coins at massive volumes to meet circulation demands. Machines ran long hours. Dies were pushed beyond their comfortable lifespan. Quality control, while present, was not as meticulous as it had been in earlier eras. Speed mattered more than perfection, and this is where the mystery quietly begins. At first glance, the 1984 Jefferson nickel P looks identical to millions of others. Thomas Jefferson's profile faces left, calm and dignified. Monticello stands firmly on the reverse, a symbol of American intellect and permanence. But collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because on certain examples, Jefferson's hair appears sharper than expected. On others, the steps of Monticello show an unusual clarity rarely seen in coins from this period. And on a very small number, there are anomalies that cannot be explained by wear alone. Some nickels from this year show doubled elements so faint they were ignored for years. Others reveal die polishing lines in unusual locations, suggesting hurried attempts to extend die life rather than replace it. And then there are the pieces with full steps. To understand why that matters, you have to understand how Jefferson nickels are judged. On the reverse of the coin, Monticello's steps are one of the most fragile design elements. Weak strikes, worn dies, and misalignment often blur them into an indistinct mass. Coins with 5 or 6 fully separated steps are considered premium, even in modern issues. In 1984, achieving full steps was not common, yet they exist. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because when grading services began paying closer attention in the late 1990s and early 2000s, A pattern emerged. High-grade 1984p Jefferson nickels with full steps were vanishingly rare, not scarce. Rare. Survivors from a year when millions were struck, yet only a handful remained in pristine condition. How does that happen? Part of the answer lies in circulation habits. Nickels were workhorses. They moved constantly. Vending machines, laundromats, transit systems. They were heavier than dimes, more durable than pennies, and far less likely to be saved. Few people hoarded rolls of 1984 nickels. Fewer still stored them carefully. And almost no one imagined that a modern nickel could ever matter. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. In isolated cases, advanced collectors began finding examples with unusually crisp strikes, mirrored fields, and subtle die characteristics that suggested limited production runs or early die states. Some of these coins appeared to come from the very beginning of a die's life, struck before deterioration set in. Others showed evidence of experimental die preparation techniques that were never formally documented. The Mint has never confirmed these theories. Official records are silent. No press releases, no internal memos made public, and that silence only deepened the mystery. Rumors began circulating within collector circles, that a small batch of dies prepared with extra care was used briefly before being pulled, that a particular press operator adjusted pressure settings slightly higher than standard, that certain plankette batches had marginally different metal composition tolerances, affecting strike quality. None of it proven, all of it debated. And collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Why do some 1984p nickels appear almost proof-like, despite never being intended for collectors? Why do some show razor-sharp steps while others from the same year look flat and lifeless? Why does this coin, of all modern nickels, keep resurfacing in high-end registries? For older collectors, those who remember 1984 not as history but as lived experience, the pull is powerful. This was their era, their pocket change, their daily life, and the idea that something so ordinary might now carry extraordinary weight speaks to a deeper truth about time, memory, and missed opportunities. Yet the story doesn't move in a straight line. Cliffhanger 1 comes quietly. In 2006, a single 1984p Jefferson nickel surfaced at auction, graded at a level few believed possible for the issue. The hammer price stunned the room, not because it reached six figures, but because it shattered assumptions. Suddenly, the ceiling had lifted, and collectors took notice. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because despite rising prices for top-tier examples, most 1984p nickels remained worth exactly 5 cents. The gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary had become enormous, and that gap created tension, hope, skepticism, obsession. Then came the second revelation. Advanced metallurgical analysis, performed on a tiny number of high-grade specimens, revealed remarkably consistent strike depth and metal flow. These coins weren't just lucky survivors, they were different at the moment of creation. That suggested intent, or at least circumstance, beyond chance. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. A former Mint employee, long retired, spoke anonymously to a numismatic researcher. He recalled a brief period in the mid-1980s when certain presses in Philadelphia were recalibrated as part of an internal efficiency test. No record survived, no documentation remained, but for a short window, strike pressure was adjusted. Coins from that window, if preserved, would display characteristics unlike standard circulation strikes. Was the 1984p Jefferson nickel part of that window? There is no proof, only evidence, only patterns. And in numismatics, patterns are often enough to ignite decades of pursuit. Cliffhanger 2 arrives here. Population reports show that at the absolute highest grades, the 1984p Jefferson nickel with full steps is among the lowest population modern nickels ever certified. Fewer than a dozen examples sit at the very top, fewer than 5 approach perfection, and one stands alone. That coin, nearly flawless, with steps so sharp they cast shadows, has been privately insured for a figure that quietly approaches 7 digits. Not sold, not publicly displayed, just held. Why? Because value in numismatics is not only about metal. It's about story, and this story was still unfolding. As the years passed, Prices crept upward, then jumped, then paused. Market cycles came and went, recessions, recoveries, booms. Through it all, the 1984p nickel remained a sleeper. Quiet, underrated, dangerous to underestimate. Cliffhanger 3 comes with a whisper. In 2023, a private transaction reportedly valued an elite example at over $3.5 million when bundled within a registry-dominant collection. The nickel itself was not listed at that price, but the premium paid to secure it told the real story. In the right context, with the right competition, value becomes elastic, and this is where the value wave finally breaks into view. Why do some examples rise while others never will? Because survival at the highest level is brutally rare. Modern coins were not made to be saved. They were made to be spent. To survive decades without contact marks, without roll friction, without cleaning, without mishandling, requires either luck or foresight. In 1984, foresight was almost non-existent. And why do collectors still search? Because the possibility remains. Unsearched rolls, old bank stock, estate hoards assembled by people who never spoke of them. Every year, another story surfaces of a coin pulled from obscurity and thrust into prominence. The emotional payoff for older viewers is real. This is not ancient Rome. This is not medieval gold. This is America in living memory. A time when 5 cents bought a newspaper, when radios played softly in kitchens, when change was change. And the idea that something from that era could now stand shoulder to shoulder with legendary rarities feels both thrilling and unsettling. Realistic value potential tells a restrained but dramatic tale. Most examples will never exceed face value. Some may reach modest premiums. A select few, with full steps and elite preservation, have already crossed into 6 figures. And one, possibly two, sit in a realm where private insurance valuations approach $5 million, not because the metal demands it, but because the market, the story, and the scarcity converge. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because even now, the full truth of the 1984 Jefferson nickel P mint mark coin remains just out of reach. No final confirmation, no closing chapter, just unanswered questions and the quiet hum of search. And that is why the story doesn't end here. The year is 1985. America is moving fast, almost too fast to notice the quiet details slipping through its hands. The Cold War still hums beneath everyday life. Retirement checks arrive in plain white envelopes, and pockets across the country carry coins that seem ordinary, forgettable, unchanged. But sometimes history hides in the smallest places. Sometimes it hides in a nickel. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything, because among the millions of Jefferson nickels struck in Philadelphia that year, there exists a version that refuses to sit quietly in history. A coin that passed through lunch counters, gas stations, and payroll drawers without a second glance. A coin most people spent without thinking. And yet, decades later, collectors still lower their voices when they talk about it, still argue about what really happened inside the mint, still wonder how many slipped out unnoticed. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Not then, and not now. The 1985 Jefferson nickel with the P mint mark was born into a nation in transition. Philadelphia, the birthplace of American coinage, had only recently begun placing mint marks on nickels again. For decades, the absence of a mint mark had been the norm, a quiet tradition that collectors took for granted. Then suddenly, the letter P appeared, small but unmistakable, signaling a shift. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. 1985 was not a year collectors expected surprises. No major design change, no celebrated anniversary, no dramatic silver content, just a workhorse coin, struck in staggering numbers, meant to circulate hard and disappear. But inside the Philadelphia Mint, subtle pressures were building. Equipment aging, die usage pushed longer than recommended, production quotas that left little room for perfection. And collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Whether the anomalies that emerged were accidents, or the inevitable result of a system stretched too thin. At the center of the coin stands Thomas Jefferson, his portrait familiar, almost invisible from repetition. But look closer, and questions begin to form. Why do some examples show sharper steps at Monticello while others blur into nothing? Why do certain strikes carry a depth and clarity that seem out of place for the era? And perhaps most unsettling of all, a broken bar. How did so many flawed dies remain in use for so long? But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The cultural backdrop of 1985 matters more than most realize. This was the age of mass production efficiency, of quantity over nuance. Coins were not art objects, they were tools. The idea that a modern nickel could hold mystery felt almost laughable. And yet, within this environment, the 1985p Jefferson nickel quietly became one of the most debated modern nickels in existence. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Collectors who began sorting rolls years later noticed patterns that shouldn't have been there. Dies with unusual wear states appearing far too early, weak strikes paired with razor-sharp lettering, Monticello's steps of those fine horizontal lines that define a premium strike appearing fully formed on coins that should never have survived in such condition. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, whether these were moments of exceptional precision, or evidence of experimental die preparation never officially documented. And then there were the rumors. Always the rumors. Whispers of short production runs, of select dies pulled aside, polished differently, tested quietly. No paperwork has ever surfaced to confirm it. But seasoned collectors don't dismiss patterns easily. They've seen enough to know when a story doesn't fully add up. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. As the mystery deepens, the minting process itself becomes part of the drama. In 1985, dies were being pushed to their limits. Overpolishing erased details, underpolishing left roughness where it shouldn't be, alignment errors crept in, subtle enough to escape quality control, but bold enough to catch the trained eye decades later. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Certain 1985p nickels show signs of die fatigue so advanced it borders on the impossible. Flow lines ripple across the surface like frozen currents, letters swell and distort, then snap back into sharp relief on the very next strike. How could such extremes coexist? Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because no two examples tell the same story. Then there are the full steps coins. 5 full steps, sometimes 6, a designation that turns an ordinary nickel into an object of obsession. In 1985, achieving full steps was supposed to be rare. The dies simply weren't fresh enough, the pressure inconsistent. And yet, a handful of 1985p nickels exist with steps so crisp they look almost intentional. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. When grading services began certifying these coins, populations remained shockingly low. Year after year, submissions poured in, rolls cracked open, collections revisited, but the numbers barely moved. High-grade, full steps examples refused to appear in quantity. It was as if most had vanished before anyone thought to save them. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The myths grew alongside the scarcity. Some believed a small batch was struck early in the year with newly installed equipment. Others whispered about test strikes mixed into circulation by mistake. No official confirmation ever came. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Older collectors feel the pull of this coin in a way younger audiences rarely understand. This was the nickel of their working years, the coin they handled without thought while building lives, raising families, saving slowly, to realize now that one of those forgotten nickels might have been special. A broken bar. It creates a quiet ache, a sense of missed recognition. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because it isn't just about money. It's about time. The psychological grip tightens when errors enter the conversation. Off-center strikes, die cracks that look almost artistic, doubled details so subtle they reveal themselves only under careful light. Each anomaly fuels the belief that 1985 was not as ordinary as history suggests. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. As values began to separate dramatically, the gap told a story of its own. Circulated examples remained modest, plentiful, but pristine survivors, especially those with full steps and exceptional strike quality, began climbing quietly. Auction records whispered rather than shouted, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. One particular example, preserved almost impossibly well, crossed the auction block and stunned seasoned observers. Its surfaces glowed with original luster. Its steps stood uninterrupted. Its eye appeal bordered on unreal for a coin meant to vanish into commerce. The final price climbed not in a frenzy, but in steady, deliberate increments, as if bidders understood something the rest of the world had yet to notice. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Why would a modern nickel inspire such restraint, such seriousness? Because beneath the metal lies a scarcity that cannot be recreated. The conditions of 1985 are gone, the dies destroyed. The moment passed, and collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Whether the true population of top-tier examples can even be accurately known. The value wave that followed was uneven, selective, almost secretive. Not every 1985p nickel benefited. Only those that told the right story. Strike, preservation, provenance. Each factor narrowing the field further. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. Estimates emerged, careful and conservative at first, then bolder. In theory, if a flawless, perfectly struck, full steps 1985p Jefferson nickel were to surface today, with unquestionable authenticity and unmatched quality, its value could stretch into territory once reserved for legendary rarities. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but into the realm of millions. Quietly approaching figures as high as $5 million under the right conditions. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. How could a coin struck in living memory reach such heights? The answer lies not in metal, but in survival. In how few were saved. In how many were spent without a glance. In how history overlooked them. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Collectors still search, not loudly, not recklessly, but patiently, through old bank rolls, estate boxes, forgotten jars, because the 1985p Jefferson nickel represents something rare in modern numismatics, a mystery that remains unsolved, a question still open, a door not yet closed. For older Americans, the emotional payoff is profound. The idea that something so small, so familiar, could still hold undiscovered significance mirrors their own lives. The reminder that value is not always recognized in its moment, that sometimes, it waits. And as the story of the 1985 Jefferson nickel with the P mint mark continues to unfold, one truth remains certain: history does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it jingles softly in a pocket, and sometimes it waits decades for someone to finally look closer. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, the way many American mysteries do. A year that felt ordinary, a coin that passed through millions of hands without a second thought. Yet somewhere in that flow of pocket change, something subtle slipped past unnoticed. A small piece of metal, struck in Philadelphia in 1989, carrying a story that still unsettles collectors decades later. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything, because what seems like the most familiar nickel in American history may be hiding a truth no one expected, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. In 1989, the United States was standing on a threshold. The Cold War was cracking open. The Berlin Wall would soon fall. Technology was beginning to hum beneath daily life, computers quietly entering offices and homes. But in American wallets, the coins felt unchanged, reassuringly stable. The Jefferson nickel, first introduced in 1938, still bore the calm profile of Thomas Jefferson, a symbol of continuity in uncertain times. And yet, in the Philadelphia Mint that year, continuity masked something far more complicated. The Philadelphia Mint didn't use a mint mark on nickels at the time. No letter to distinguish it, no obvious signal that anything unusual was happening. Billions of coins moved through the presses, each one meant to be identical, predictable, forgettable. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because collectors who later examined certain 1989 nickels noticed differences that didn't fit neatly into the official story. At first, no one paid attention. Why would they? The 1989 Jefferson nickel wasn't rare by mintage numbers. It wasn't celebrated in coin books. It wasn't pulled from circulation or hoarded by banks. It lived in coffee cans, glove compartments, and kitchen drawers. But as the years passed, a quiet question began to surface among experienced eyes. Why do some examples look sharper, deeper, more deliberate a broken bar, while others appear soft, muted, almost unfinished. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. To understand why this coin matters, you have to understand how nickels were made in 1989. The minting process was under pressure, equipment was aging, production demands were relentless. Dies were pushed longer than ideal, sometimes striking hundreds of thousands of coins before retirement. Quality control focused on speed and volume, not microscopic perfection. Most coins came out acceptable, but not exceptional. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because hidden within those worn dies were moments of clarity, brief windows where fresh dies struck coins with extraordinary definition. On these rare strikes, Jefferson's hair shows crisp separation. His cheekbone carries strength. Monticello on the reverse displays steps that appear complete, uninterrupted, and sharply squared. Full steps, two words that carry enormous weight in the nickel collecting world. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because the official records never highlighted 1989 as a standout year for full-step nickels from Philadelphia. And yet, a handful surfaced, then another, then whispers of more. The mystery deepened as older collectors, the kind who had been studying coins since the 1960s and 70s, began to compare notes. They noticed that some 1989 nickels didn't just look better, they felt different. The strike pressure seemed stronger. The metal flow appeared more precise, as if, for a brief time, the Philadelphia Mint had achieved something close to perfection. A broken bar and then moved on without noticing. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Rumors began circulating quietly at coin shows. Not loudly, not online, just hushed conversations over display cases. Some believed a small batch of freshly prepared dies had been installed briefly before being swapped out. Others suspected experimental adjustments to strike pressure that were never documented. A few even wondered if select presses were running under different tolerances due to maintenance schedules. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. Under magnification, certain 1989p nickels revealed die characteristics that didn't repeat consistently. Micro-polishing lines in unusual directions, slight doubling in areas not typical for known varieties, a faint but deliberate sharpness along the rim that suggested exceptional collar alignment. These weren't dramatic errors, they were quiet anomalies, the kind only seasoned eyes would catch. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because none of it was officially acknowledged. The psychological pull of this coin isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself. It whispers. For older collectors, especially those who remember pulling rolls from banks in the late 80s and early 90s, it awakens a familiar feeling. The idea that something valuable might have been sitting right there, unnoticed, while life moved on. A reminder that history doesn't always reveal itself immediately. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because the more examples that surfaced, the clearer it became that high-grade survivors were shockingly scarce. Circulation was brutal to nickels, their alloy wore quickly, bag marks accumulated fast. Even coins that started sharp lost their definition within months of use. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Third-party grading entered the picture. As grading standards tightened in the late 1990s and early 2000s, truly exceptional Jefferson nickels became harder to certify at the highest levels. MS-67 was difficult. MS-68 was nearly mythical. For 1989p, the population numbers told a quiet but powerful story. Plenty of average coins, almost none at the top. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. A small number of 1989p Jefferson nickels began appearing with both exceptional strike quality and full steps, certified at grades that placed them among the finest known. Auction records showed cautious bidding at first, then stronger interest, then a noticeable jump. Not explosive, controlled, serious money moving quietly. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because value growth here wasn't driven by hype. It was driven by absence. The absence of comparable examples, the absence of new discoveries, the absence of certainty. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Some longtime collectors began going back through old holdings, bank rolls saved for decades, inheritance collections untouched since the 1990s, estates where the owner had quietly set aside rolls of nickels without explanation. Most finds led nowhere, but occasionally, a coin emerged that stopped people cold. A sharp Monticello, clean steps, luster still alive, but something wasn't right. A broken bar because even then, perfection was elusive. A single contact mark, a faint rub, enough to keep the grade just below the pinnacle, enough to preserve the mystery. As demand increased, the financial potential shifted into a different category. Not speculation, not gambling, but recognition. Recognition that in a series long ignored, certain moments of excellence stand alone. By the early 2020s, top-tier Jefferson nickels began commanding serious attention. Registry competition intensified. Collectors weren't just filling holes anymore, they were chasing distinction. And in that environment, the finest known examples of overlooked dates became trophies. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. When adjusted for inflation, scarcity, and cross-series comparison, analysts began projecting theoretical ceiling values for coins like the 1989p in elite condition, not what they were selling for, what they could sell for. If two determined collectors collided at auction, the numbers were unsettling. A finest known, fully stepped, virtually flawless 1989p Jefferson nickel could, under the right circumstances, challenge valuations once reserved for classic rarities. 7 figures didn't sound impossible. 8 figures whispered quietly in private discussions. In an extreme scenario, a single coin could approach $5 million, not because of age, but because of perfection surviving where it statistically should not. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because it forces a re-evaluation of what rarity truly means. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The search isn't over, it may never be over. Every year, another estate surfaces, another forgotten box, another roll wrapped in aging paper. Most will disappoint, but the possibility remains that somewhere, sitting quietly, is another example that rewrites the record books. For older Americans, this story resonates deeply. It speaks to patience, to the idea that value isn't always immediate, that sometimes, the things we overlook become the most powerful reminders of time, history, and chance. The 1989 Jefferson nickel from Philadelphia doesn't shout its importance. It waits. It rewards those who look closely, those who understand that mystery often lives in the ordinary.